Welcome back to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy mind, body, and spirit. I'm Dr. Steve Thayer, and today my co-host, Dr. Reed Robison, and I are joined for the third time on the show by Hannah Cross. Hannah is a licensed clinical social worker, expert therapist, Reiki master, yoga teacher, ecstatic dance facilitator, and super cool. We get a little spicy on today's episode and talk about sex. I shouldn't have said it like that. I apologize. This one kind of turned into an interview, kind of me interviewing Reed and Hannah about Tantra, because they're both yoga experts, and that topic is super interesting to me. We discuss the challenges and potential benefits of non-monogamous relationships. We try to normalize sexual desire and expression. We touch on psychedelic-assisted therapy for couples, and a whole lot more. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll get to watch my big bald head light up like Rudolph's nose when I blush. And while you're enjoying that spectacle, you could go ahead and like the video. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're listening on a podcast app of some kind, please rate us. Give us a glowing review if you're willing. If you'd like to read our show notes, follow any of the links to the resources or topics we mentioned. That can be found on our website, psychedelictherapyfrontiers.com. You can follow us on social media, particularly Instagram. I'm at Dr. Steve Thayer. Reed is at Innerspace Doctor. So without further ado, I bring you Hannah Cross. Well, welcome back, folks. Back by popular demand is our beloved Hannah Cross.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Hannah.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. So Hannah's episodes are some of our highest viewed episodes, so we're hoping to knock it out of the park today. Not only because of her presence, but also because of our topic. And we were talking a lot about, before we hit record, what our topic actually is, because it could go so many different directions. And Hannah had mentioned that maybe we need to make a series on this, and I think that's a good idea. A series on relationships and all things relationships. But I thought maybe we could explore a couple of those variables today in this conversation. Mm-hmm. Sex, sexual health, maybe what is the term you used before when we were talking about this? The something containers.
Relationship containers.
Creative
Different relationship containers that work well for different people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And psychedelics, because there's some really cool, interesting developments in the world of psychedelic medicine around couples therapy, around sexual wellness. So yeah.
Sex, drugs, and Tantra.
I was going to say, well, we could do rock and roll, but I don't know if it really applies.
Sex, drugs, and yoga, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I got to admit, when I hear the word Tantra, because unlike the two of you, I'm not super well versed in the yoga world. I just know the old biases that I bring to the table, like the biases that I developed as a young person, seeing like tantric practices. It was always talked about like tantric sex. Is it tantra or tantra? Tantra. Okay.
Although we'll accept either.
You said tantra.
And you could see where those come from. If you were a young Steve wandering through the Barnes & Noble and asking for the Tantra or Tantra section, you might find some tantric sex books or tantric
those
massage.
are the ones I was looking for. Yeah. Let's be honest.
But it does mean so much more. And I know we were pre-gaming talking about this a little bit, and I really liked Hannah's definition. So I'll pass it over to her.
Pass the baton.
To explain what it is.
Yeah, what's Tantra?
Well, if you really break down the word, it means expansion through liberation. The word Tantra also implies weaving. And so we would be talking about weaving of polarities, weaving of the masculine and the feminine, weaving of the inner and the outer.
Yeah, it's a recognition of the energies inside of us that you might call masculine and feminine energies, and a recognition that it's all in all of us. This is way beyond gender, if gender is even real, and it's way beyond that, but it's like harnessing that creative life force, the passion, the force of creation, the force of manifestation, and learning to weave it into day-to-day life, work with it, use it inside and in relationship, not just in intimate partnership, but in like your relationship with the world.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm detecting overlap between that description of Tantra and like Freudian libidinal energy. because libidinal energy, and I'm not a Freud expert, but from what I remember from grad school, it's a sexual force, but it's a creative force. It's your drive.
It is the creative force.
Right.
Yeah.
So some of these practices, like in some parts of the world, there are a lot of Tibetan schools and Hindu schools of Tantra, and a lot of yogic variations on this. Some of them will, like, there are a lot of variations, but some will practice like reserving the sexual energy or sharing that carefully because it can be channeled into so much more, like your life purpose, or transformed in other powerful ways.
Yeah, in the sort of popular media space, that's the NoFap subreddit, right? And FAP is like this slang term for masturbation. So there's this whole community, most of them men, who make these claims about that reserving of your sexual energy. So don't masturbate, don't orgasm, and it'll give you superpowers.
Yeah.
Not.
And I've got to admit, as a scientist and an aspiring mystic, let's say, but coming from a scientific background, when I hear those things, I check them out. Like, I'll go to the studies, and like, Major League Baseball player pitches X number of perfect games and cites not masturbating or having sex as a reason, just as an example. And there have been studies attempted, but it's not clear, like, from a scientific lens, but putting on my experiential, like, contemplative practitioner hat, I do think it's a power. This is the force of creation. This is the force that led us all to be here on this planet. And there is certainly something there. And just to give an example, like, if you're, say, in an intimate relationship, a committed partnership, and say you're a dude and you're not with your female committed partner, you're out walking in the world and you see another beautiful woman, like, you could deny that was even something, or squash it into areas of shame and repression, or you can acknowledge the beauty, and then you have a choice. If someone goes and chases that in an unenlightened way, they're going to spill their energy and wreck their life, right? Or you can say, oh, there's beauty all around me, I love you, and then you can harness that and channel it back into whether it's your own relationship or your life purpose, or that meeting you've got in the boardroom, where you're essentially practicing that creative life force in a enlightened, conscious way with anything. Yeah.
I love that you just brought that up, Reed. I've thought about that a lot. Just how important deep connections are to life and to other people, and how really, if we're looking at like healthy relationships, how healthy relationships allow for those deep connections to happen outside of the relationship. Acknowledging creative power.
So in Reed's example, if you have, we have this committed dyad, these two people who are committed to each other, and if that relationship dyad is healthy, then, and this person has an enlightened understanding of their sexual energy or their tantric energy or libidinal energy, and they see an attractive other, they can appreciate that person's beauty, and they can use this sexual energy not only for sexual expression or gratification or connection, but also for other types of things like creative expression or I don't know, activism or something like that.
It's kind of like we talk about in mindfulness and in other ways, or even when we were talking about the monkey mind in a previous episode, makes a terrible master a beautiful servant. That energy, like, could be the same. You could look at it almost the same way. Like, you have to bring some awareness, some loving awareness into the equation, and not just respond to primal urges, because, you might do harm. But if you have that loving, the key being loving awareness container of, I am not going to stop the flow of love due to fear, but I'm also never going to do anything that's going to harm that person, their community, my tribe, and all beings,
Yep. This is okay. This is feeling like a podcast where I'm interviewing you. So I like this. So now this is making sense to me because Hannah and I were talking earlier before we hit record about kind of modern polyamory, how we're seeing this sort of sexual revolution in certain pockets of the West where people are ditching what you might call a traditional monogamy in favor of, just kind of pairing up with whoever they want. And you were describing, Reed, this kind of prototypical person who claims to be sexually liberated, but what I'm thinking is they're just sort of giving in to all the sexual triggers and urges. And I'm not necessarily judging that, but I don't know if from this healthier, more skillful tantric perspective, if that's the wiser thing to do.
Here's the, go ahead.
If it's hurting somebody.
Yeah, and then I have another way of looking at it, but I want to hear Hannah's perspective.
My way of looking at what you're talking about, Steve, is that, and we were talking about this earlier, but it's like the pendulum has swung a little bit too far in some of maybe like the modern polyamory circles from maybe what was the once necessary for survival, like monogamous relationship, like marriage was happening for survival. And like, that's not necessarily what needs to be anymore. Mm-hmm. And so it seems like that maybe the pendulum has swung kind of far in some circles, some polyamorous circles, but, which I get, because I get wanting to seek freedom, wanting to maybe rebel against old patriarchal systems that no longer work anymore. But I feel like there's a middle path that acknowledges that though we all need freedom, we're also bonding mammals. Like we also actually, and there is research to support this, but we actually have more fulfilling sexual relationships when sex is happening in a securely bonded relationship.
That setting.
Securely bonded, which would you say doesn't necessarily have to mean exclusive?
Depends on the person.
So so it can depend on the person, right? So you can have a couple that is securely bonded, and they have a fulfilling sexual relationship, and maybe even children in that bond, but still have intimate and/or sexual relationships with other people. You might call it an open relationship or a monogamish relationship. And it could work, in a healthy way, in accordance with, being monogamous mammals or whatever, like you were describing. Again, I'm thinking out loud because I'm interviewing you guys. That's what I've just claimed. That's what I'm doing today.
Let's get Esther Perel on here.
I know there's lots of great experts out there on this. But so,
speaking of great experts, one perspective that was really helpful for me in how to look at this is David Deida. Have you read? I've
heard of him. I haven't read a book.
One of his favorite books for me has a terrible title, but in my opinion, it's called The Way of the Superior Man. But it's really a book about embracing like a non-toxic masculine energy. He has another book for women called Dear Lover, but his teachings are more like set aside gender, it doesn't matter. Like inside each of us is a predominant masculine energy or a predominant female, and we both have both. And he even has a way of identifying that. That's pretty easy, but we can talk about that later if you want. But he has this framework that he talks about when it comes to polyamory of his first, second, and third stage love. Like the first stage love is like kind of an unenlightened love, but you give me this, I'll give you that. Like it's a barter, tit for tat. Like, nope, you're not doing what I want. I'm withholding love from you or making you suffer too. And then there's a second stage that's like kind of, it might even look like unconditional love, but it's more like you're settling into that place of a secure bond. But he says the third stage love, where it's true enlightened love, where unbridled, but where you'd never do anything to harm the other. He says that's the only place that true polyamory can exist in a free-flowing positive way, because it has that qualifier of like, I would never do anything to harm my partner or our children or their children. And he just points out, and it makes me realize that there are a couple paths of polyamory. Like you could go down that path early in your first or second stage love development and hit lots of triggers and learn to get over your jealousy and learn a ton and have a lot of life experiences. But to do it in a sustainable, enlightened way, he'll point out that very few people have gotten there, and it's not that common to have two people in that kind of semi-enlightened state to coexist in that way. But it's I think it's a great way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like that you mentioned to exist in that kind of love that could make it work. It's probably kind of rare, but I think it would have to stem from having that type of relationship with yourself in order to then have that kind of love for somebody else. Mm-hmm. And that takes a lot of work. Yeah. I look around at a lot of my friends who are on, maybe you could call it a spiritual path, like a path that really prioritizes personal growth, and they grow really rapidly, right? And like they're almost all single. Like I've just observed that a lot of my friends are single. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that they're starved for deep connection. Like they have deep connections in their friendships and probably with themselves. Mm-hmm. But I think it's been hard for some of them to find a partner that is on that same kind of growth trajectory and can hold space for their growth, like really from that unconditionally loving place.
Same kind of growth trajectory, but not their trajectory.
Yeah,
right?
not their
It's
trajectory.
hard to find parallel paths when you are on your own custom, bespoke spiritual path. Because I find that in some people who either they have never been in a committed relationship, or they've been in one and then they're out of one, and they want to find somebody who just complements their path, mm-hmm. or who's willing to get on their path and support them on their path, and not really thinking hard about this other person's path. So my guess is it's probably really hard to find two people the way you folks are describing them, whose paths sing together, harmonize.
Although I think a component of that I just want to point out is that even it's impossible to find someone on the exact same path, right? Yeah. And there is this phase of kind of inner work and the rapid trajectory where it's extra hard to sync up, but there is something about relationship that pushes buttons that won't otherwise get pushed in a really important way for our development. And I think not to say people have to ever be in relationship, but by being in it, even and especially through the struggles, there's extra learning and lessons and a rich journey there, even if the relationship fails, which is a terrible thing to say about a relationship because you were part of each other's journey. Anyway, just wanted to point that out.
Yeah,
that's making me think of Aubrey Marcus's path, like his relationship journey, because he's been pretty public about having had a open relationship or a polyamorous relationship with his partner. I think her name was Whitney, for like 7 years. And on his podcast and in his writings, he was kind of giving us a play-by-play behind the scenes of what it was like, and it was really, really hard. And now he's married. He's in a monogamous relationship. And he'll reflect on it sometimes in his podcast. And he'll talk about how he felt like he was doing it the quote-unquote right way, the open relationship thing. Felt like he was being enlightened about it and charitable and all that. But he also would get super jealous and feel very, very threatened and very, very insecure.
Yeah.
And I guess there could be space for all of that to happen in a healthy polyamorous setup. But I'm just trying to think what it would look like, Hannah, this relationship to self that you were talking about. Like what would a really healthy relationship to self look like in a open or polyamorous or monogamish relationship? Because it wouldn't be devoid of those triggers. It wouldn't be devoid of jealousy or hurt or fear.
Or maybe just even period, whether it was in a polyamorous relationship or a monogamish or monogamous one. Mm-hmm. As you were saying that, I'm like, what defines a healthy relationship with self? Honesty, like just authenticity.
Acceptance.
Being able to say like, oh, this is what I want or this is what I don't want, and being able to like really live from that place of honesty with self.
So knowing what it is, being honest with self about what it is, and then accepting and giving authority to that, what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Secure attachment as a foundation in yourself, because, you could either be anxiously attached and then those buttons are pushed all the time, where it's hard to do much else when you're always jealous, always freaking out. And that's why some people would just say, oh, I would never imagine trying polyamory. It would drive me crazy, because it would drive them crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also, if people are too avoidant or detached, like you can see how they might be numbed to the attunement and the ripple effects of that. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about doing your own work and working on your capacity to love, and that honest truth about what your intentions are, and going into that as a key starting point.
Honest with yourself, and then honest with, a partner, if there's one involved.
Yeah. There's a book that I found really interesting several years ago called The Uncomfortable Truth About Relationships by Neil Strauss, where it talks about his journey through all forms of polyamory. And he's a good writer. So it was a really fascinating read, and it's a cool looking book. It looks like a white Bible. Yeah.
Yeah, there are lots of good books out there that I've heard of that I just haven't read. I've heard they're good around topics like this. Like is there one called Ethical Non-monogamy, and then I think there's one called like The Ethical Slut. That one's more about kink, I think.
But even the like
Come As You Are is another one.
Esther Perel, like State of Affairs, Mating in Captivity.
Mm-hmm.
Sex at Dawn is another really good book about these challenging parts of the Western approach to relationship, because it's not like this in all cultures and all ages. Like this romanticized way of finding your soulmate. There's some potholes to step in with that idea that gets a lot of people into trouble.
Yeah.
Enmeshment, is that what you mean by potholes with that romanticized idea?
Yeah, and among other things, but would love to hear what you see as enmeshment in relationship. Because, I mean, the fact of the matter is most relationships end, right? I mean, they all, everything ends eventually, but most marriages end up in divorce these days. But yeah, I think that that's certainly one part of it. But if you look at like where this idea came from in the last few hundred years, and Alain de Botton talks about it, this British philosopher, talks about how challenging romanticism ends up being for our relationships, in that you think that, you fall in love and you think it's going to be all like love, bliss, and rainbows and a walk in the park. And you do spend all this honeymoon period in often a blissful state, sunsets and everything else. But the fact of the matter is we all have this different, like you were saying, this different journey and path up the mountain and different trajectory. And you've got to almost know that going in, that people are going to change, and it's not easy, but there is a lot of blissful reward on the other side of that, which, I hear you talk about your marriage, your relationship, Steve, and I think about that. Like, you put in the work, and you're reaping the rewards of this deep and deeper connection with another human, that I think is a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, when Hannah was talking about her friends that are on these sort of steep spiritual growth trajectories, and that they're single, I was thinking about my growth trajectory over the last 17 years that I've been married. And I've grown a ton in the container of this monogamous marriage with my wife, and she's grown a ton too. We were both very different people, now than when we started our relationship in a lot of really important ways. And we haven't always been in really synchronous, on really synchronous paths, but we've been knitted together through some foundational, I'm getting all nerdy about this. I just love her. Like, I'm in love with her. She loves me, according to what she tells me. And I definitely feel it from her. And that has always kept us together. Even when, you know, I left the LDS church and she didn't for a time. And that, you know, that breaks up a lot of marriages who start in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in other religions for that matter, where family and marriage is wrapped up in the doctrine and the ideology. So yeah, I think you can grow together and still have a lot of freedom and flexibility in the container that is a monogamous committed relationship too.
Yeah, this is funny, Steve, because earlier we were doing a training on our 5 pillars of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, and you quoted a song from Encanto.
Encanto, yeah.
There's another one on that soundtrack called Dos Oruguitas, and which means 2 caterpillars. And the translation of that song just made me cry when I first read it. But it's about these 2 caterpillars, and they're holding on really tightly to each other, and they weather all of these storms by doing that. But there comes this time where they have to let go of each other to build a cocoon and then fly as butterflies. And that song really, really hits. And I think, you know, what you're talking about and growing together in a relationship, we have to learn to do that to become who we're supposed to be. And sometimes those butterflies will probably, you know, reunite, the relationship continues. And sometimes, you know, in your word, like some relationships fail and they have to fly their separate ways.
Yeah, and that's why I like, that is a beautiful song, and why I like this idea that kind of comes out of the celebrity marital therapy realm, but just the title of like conscious uncoupling, I think is a great way to look at it, of like, you know, if people realize that, oh, we kind of got married in a hurry and we actually have very different values, or we have tried our best and changed in fundamentally different ways. So we're going to agree to set each other free so we can grow into our fullest, like truest selves and love each other in another way for this next chapter, from afar, whatever that is. But the song you quoted, I'm going to have a listen to that. It makes me think of another song that we should put in the show notes that's a tearjerker called Grow As We Go by Ben Platt. He was the guy in Dear Evan Hansen, but he sings it and even teary-eyed himself in this song about how, you know, you can change, it's okay. You know, I'll change in my way, you change in yours, and we'll love each other anyway.
In the Celtic traditions, they look at like the soul of a relationship as being like its own soul, kind of like we might look at an individual human being's soul. And they talk about like the dark night of the soul of even relationships, and how that dark night of the soul, just like we talked about on our episode about spiritual emergencies, but the dark night of a soul as an individual is that like real turning point into our expansion, and it's dark and it usually is really painful. And relationships can have that too, according to the Celtic traditions. And so on the other side of that dark night is going to be an emergence of something that is better, more evolved, more expansive. And maybe that means, we're loving each other from a distance, but maybe that also means now we get to start all over, having transformed and move forward together.
Yeah, that's a beautiful idea. And it reminds me, we were talking earlier about a couple I had the honor and privilege of working with recently in their journey. And it strikes me that many relationships do need some impetus or stimulus for change. That's really a challenging thing, or else you might just coast along in this disconnected, half numbed out, frustrated state until you're faced with, okay, are we doing this? Are we doing the work to get to the other side of that or not? And the work's never done, but it's kind of like you're describing of, changing in different ways and trajectories with your wife, but staying connected through love and loving each other through it
Yeah, love as the connecting force, and also commitment. Like, we started our marriage contract with a commitment that we would be together forever, and sort of, through sickness and health and all that stuff. And so that's just the assumption that is the container for the relationship. And if that were ever to change, we'd need to have a conversation about it and why it would change and that kind of thing. But so if the underlying assumption is we're going to stay together, then that's the lens through which I'm looking at all the problems in the relationship. And that could be probably bad if, let's say, there was abuse, if she was beating the shit out of me or something like that, right? And then you're like, well, no, I have to stay in because I committed, when maybe we would want that relationship to end. But it's certainly working for us.
Yeah, and what brings people together isn't necessarily the same as what makes people good life partners, right? And maybe we could circle back around to that idea of the tantric energy too. It just makes me think of the polarities that exists in a partnership, and how, again, ignoring gender, but we use these terms like masculine energy and feminine energy, or yang for the masculine and yin for the feminine. And you've got Shakti, Shiva, as the masculine, Shakti, feminine. And that difference is what creates an attraction, an arc of polarity. It's kind of like two poles of electricity. And if you're exactly the same, which can happen, it might be more of a mundane or less spicy existence, but it's the differences, or that yin-yang balance of energy, that really creates this weave together of like tantric coexistence.
It might be helpful to talk about some of those like yin qualities.
Yeah.
And what are the yang qualities?
Take it away.
Do you want to start, or you want me to rattle some off?
Yeah, I mean, I can totally start. How about you take the masculine qualities, and I'll hit on some of the kind of core feminine qualities.
So I like a simple analogy, a couple of them to help. Like, if the masculine is the container or the riverbank, and the feminine's the river, it doesn't mean the masculine is in control at all. In fact, the river, in a very significant way, actually shapes the riverbank and the course of it. Or say you have a milk jug or a container to receive a liquid. The container's the masculine energy. The flowing, moving energy, or the liquid that goes in, is the feminine. The feminine's the dance. Masculine's the stability, or the emptiness.
I'd like to add one that I like to that. So, where the masculine might be the atmosphere, the feminine are all of the storm systems that happen within that atmosphere. And the atmosphere just holds all of that, right? With equanimity. Like, whatever is going on storm-wise today, that's okay with me. I'm just holding it here. And we were talking before we hit record to Steve about our experience working as a dyad in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, and how it's been nice for, just with that one particular example, though the roles could be reversed, for me to be able to be in the therapy and in the emotion piece with the participant, while your presence there kind of helped hold the safe container. Like, you could stand there, help me feel safe, help the participant feel safe, when we were both working in the kind of storm of the emotions. Though, of course, that doesn't have to, we could have switched roles, and we probably did.
Yeah, there were times when I think we did. We switched in and out of those roles. We were dynamic in those roles. But I like the idea of sort of the ancient and maybe fundamental nature of masculine and feminine energy. And they don't have to have anything to do with penises and vaginas, right?
Yeah, totally.
It doesn't have to be that. It's just, this is kind of the way the universe is constructed, with these polarities.
And as individuals, as we're constructed, I have masculine qualities and feminine qualities.
I would say a lot of my feminine qualities are what make me a good therapist.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure. And some of my masculine qualities also help me be a good therapist. It's that kind of holding space. And they work together for creation. You know, we were talking about Tantra's emphasis on the creative life force energy. And it is the feminine and the masculine that create together. Like the feminine cannot create without the masculine and vice versa.
Which is why when you see people who maybe are they're repressing one form of energy over the other, that they're having trouble knowing what they want, knowing who they are, and they're having trouble solving problems creatively.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier David Deida's quick way of telling, and in his kind of witty, anything goes style, he just says, like, look at your intimate sexual relationship preference. Do you want to be the one who gets ravished, or do you want to do the ravishing? Do you want to be in charge in the bedroom, which would be more of that masculine energy, doesn't matter what gender, or do you want to be the receiver, or do you want to drive the car and make the decisions of where you're going, or do you want to be in the passenger seat and not have to do that so you can dance and flow? And what's interesting about your weather pattern analogy, well, two things is, like, from a medical standpoint, I'm just fascinated by the fact that the female hormones are so different day to day, and as a male, we have no idea what that's like, because it is like flatline of variability, where the feminine, like, energy or mood and like feelings do change, but there's this other component to it, as like the feminine energy wants to know that the container's there and safe, like you were talking about in the therapy dyad, and it will have a storm rise and test that for until the end of time. It might get less and less when you feel more and more stable, but the feminine needs to know that that energy can flow and dance and be free and held, and they're safe. They'll be caught when they fly around and need to come down. And
when they know that it's safe, then the potential to be creative is so great. Because on the monthly cycle, as the hormones are changing, I mean, it's so creative if you learn how to utilize that. There's, like, very much, at least in my experience, an outward focused time, and then a more inward focused time. And then I can use whatever happens in that inward focused time to then create things that are more outward focused.
Yeah, that container of safety is really important in sexual relationships too. That we learn a lot from this dance between masculine and feminine, regardless of biological sex, from the kink community, from the kind of the roles of dom and submissive. And they talk about that a lot can happen between consenting adults sexually that would maybe horrify your average American, but that can actually be beautiful expressions of that sexual energy if it happens in safe containers. That are approached with active communication, safe words, and all that kind of thing. But I've just heard experts on these topics talk about the creative expression, sexual expression, and how healing it can be for a person who might be traumatized or who might feel like they don't have autonomy over their bodies. To be able to, be a receiver from a dom who's really, really safe, that they can feel safe with, or to be a giver, to be dominating in a sexual context and feel empowered.
It's actually shadow work, a great example of it. And there's another book that I'd recommend called Existential Kink that talks about, it's a funny title again, but a really eye-opening book showing how the patterns laid down early in your life often show up in sexual preference in the bedroom, and how I used to have a simplified view of this, is that some people's preferences are just weird. But there's actually a lot of, like you said, healing and like shadow work and personal growth and relationship growth that can happen by being open to those patterns and preferences and different dynamics in a safe container.
And are you saying that it's shadow work because a lot of times sexuality has been like exiled to the shadows?
Yeah, and it can come from a number of different examples, but that's I think the underlying principle is that there's something that, like an unexpressed, unseen, unhealed part that kind of can come out in that way or come to the light in that way, whether it's in that like dom sub example or like pain or any kind of some people like to be talked to in a certain way or feel like they can completely surrender. I used to be so puzzled by the fact that in the bedroom some people like to choke each other until you hear about like where that might come from and these primal evolutionary wired forces that also kind of wires that get crossed throughout our upbringing in modern life where we can't talk about or express these and they end up buried.
That's the mistake that a lot of people make when they look at the kink community, is that they think, oh, these are just sexually traumatized people living out their trauma. There's no way that this can be healthy. And certainly that can be the case. People who are sadistic and masochistic in sexual ways could be channeling their trauma through sex. But I think if we can open our hearts and learn from the kink community, and sex therapists, people who are professionals in these areas, I think we learn more about what Reed's talking about. Nothing like talking about kink to make for an awkward silence. It does make me think. We were talking about this Netflix show before we hit record. Gwyneth Paltrow's show. Was it Sex, Love, and Goop? Is that the title of the
sex
show?
In the title.
Yeah,
but,
something like that. And she gets a ton of shit, and I'm not sure I love everything about her stuff. So chill out, people, if you're getting triggered by me mentioning that show.
Yeah, but it was a really interesting show though about like energetic components of sex therapy and Tantra that can be kind of brought into the relationship work, and it really powerful and touching, eye-opening stuff as well.
I thought so, because there were some examples of, expert sex therapists walking people through their trauma that was causing them to brace, causing them to feel bad about themselves, really interfering with their ability to open up and really enjoy the sexual relationship and enjoy the person in that relationship. And the tools they had to use were tools that, again, the layperson would be like, oh, what? This seems a little odd.
Yeah, I've never seen that show, but I think I would like it. I mean, just the energetic piece, I think if a relationship was an iceberg, like what we see with our five senses is probably the tip of the iceberg, and so much of a relationship is happening on this energetic level. That really interests me. And the healing from trauma piece is one that really interests me too. Like, it's been incredibly rewarding to see people be able to pull their sexuality out of the shadows and really like integrate it into their being through healing trauma around sexual abuse.
It's always fascinating to me, we're wounded in relationship often, but the healing, the complete healing often needs to happen in relationship too. And just like I see the yoga mat as a laboratory for looking inside myself and doing inner work, the intimate components of a relationship are that same laboratory for the work of interbeing in the world. And it just reminds me of like the tantric practice of learning to identify and embrace those energies within you that you can practice with your partner by making love, let's say, in a safe container, and you're essentially communing with the divine, or in this like triangular relationship with a transpersonal place, an altered state you could get to, and you're learning to touch into it and harness these creative powers that you can then take with you respectively out in the world, knowing you're safe, supported, loved, and worthy and powerful. And then you can go make love to the world in a sense, like through your purpose, through your healing, like sharing your gifts and things like that.
I love that, Reed. What a good point. I love that piece about being able to take it then out into the world, that sensuality and the creative force that is connected to sexuality. Because I mean, it might be the most powerful force, really. Like it is something, it's something incredibly powerful that can be used.
How babies are born and how dreams are manifest and how, how life force flows.
And I think maybe listeners would like to just be reminded that they can bring their sensuality with them into their lives and find ways to do that. And it's a good idea. And even if it's just like you put on a cute pair of underwear.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah. Savoring
sign me up.
what you taste and smell and being fully present for the sensory experience of your life.
Yeah.
I think sensuality is more than just cute underwear, right? It's mindful presence with the sensualness, the sensations of every momentary experience. Like, sometimes my wife can be really, really sexy in cute underwear. She can also be really sexy in pajamas that cover practically every inch of her skin, because I can just be present with her and appreciate everything I love about her. And she might be cute and embarrassed that she doesn't look quote unquote sexy. And that might be the sexiest thing in the world to me, because I'm bringing presence and love to the moment.
And you're in your body. Yeah. Feeling the moment.
Embodiment. Yeah. And it's a key ingredient to all this.
I heard a person, I think she's a sex therapist, talking about her journey. And she shared the experience where she was having sex with her boyfriend at the time, and it occurred to her she couldn't feel the touch of his, she couldn't feel, like when he kissed her on the neck, she couldn't feel his lips on her skin. She could feel the sexual act, but she couldn't feel anything on her skin. She's like, oh my gosh, I am not in my body.
Yeah.
And this was that insight was the start of a journey for her, where she really embraced sensuality and becoming more embodied, and it totally changed the sexual landscape for her. In
the eating disorder work that I've been immersed in for the past several years, there's an embodiment researcher who I've really learned a lot from, named Niva Piran, and she wrote Journeys of Embodiment. It's like a textbook and has the experience of embodiment scale that we've used a lot in clinic. But she uses the analogy of a corset, and she's talking mostly about women born into this society, repressed, and these hooks of the corset, like, oh, you can't display this sensuality, sexuality. You stop dancing, singing, embracing all that. You stop expressing yourself. You stop speaking your truth or displaying any like big emotions, and how like damaging that is to like the individual, to society, to this like beautiful power we're talking about, and how the journey back to one's body to wholeness involves like undoing those hooks of the corset and experiencing the joy of movement or the sensuality within you and letting it out and embracing, like finding your voice again, and finding your pleasures and honoring those. So I think it's such an important thing in the work we do.
Yeah. So as we wrap up today's episode, is there any anything you would point our listeners to maybe explore this topic in greater depth? And maybe we can invite everybody listening that if you want to hear more about any one particular thing we talked about, because like we tend to do in these episodes, we skim the surface of a lot of different aspects of a broader topic, which I just love doing. But if there's something that you want to dive deeper into, just let us know. Email us comments on wherever you can make comments. We'll do a deeper dive. But yeah, any concluding thoughts?
Of where to go next?
Yeah, because this is, it's kind of a forced conclusion because our cameras are running out of batteries. But like,
finding the spaces where you can be in your body is so important. If that is yoga or just taking time at the end of the day to sink and see what's in there. Yeah,
I would say bring validating love to all aspects of relationship. So that could be relationship to a partner and relationship to self. If you have an urge, if you have an interest, If you have a conversation that you want to have, bring validating love to that and see where you can take it. Because it's the shame that pushes things into the shadow that then cause problems.
Yep, sounds good. Looking forward to part 2 of our relationship series.
2 through 7 of sex, love, relationships, drugs, rock and roll, panda bears,
Amen.
whatever you want to include. Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thanks, folks. Thank you, dear listener, for listening. It means a lot to me. Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Novamind, a mental health company that specializes in psychedelic medicine and research. You can learn more about Novamind's mission to increase access to legal, safe, and evidence-based psychedelic medicine at novamind.ca. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're using to listen or watch. Also, if you're feeling generous today, please leave us a glowing review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. If you'd like to reach out to us with questions, suggestions, criticisms, etc., please email us at psychfrontiers@novamind.ca. Thanks again. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Please consult a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.